Hi, so I'm Emily Robinson, and this is my colleague Jonathan Moss, and we are both in the politics department. And we wanted to talk to you today about a project that we're working on together, along with a colleague who is not at Sussex, but did his PhD in the politics department with us, Jake Watts. And the project is a book. It's called Head, Hearts and Guts, An Emotional History of Brexit Britain. And it's under contract at the moment with Manchester University Press. So we're sort of in the process of writing up the final version. So what we're doing really is using, in an attempt to sort of get behind the kind of media narratives that circulated around Brexit and how people felt about it, and also the sort of political science experiments or kind of surveys about sort of people's emotions. We are looking at first-hand accounts that ordinary people wrote throughout the referendum process, and a year later and a couple of years after that, that they submitted to the Mass Observation Project. So these are kind of long, first-hand discursive accounts, and we're really using them to kind of pick out what people were feeling, but also what people were sort of feeling about how others were feeling about their own feelings, and thinking about the role that feeling could or should play in political life.
Yeah, and so some of the key things that we have found are that, well, Brexit was, for mass observers, an emotional moment. And we see a range of feelings from anger, distress, fear, elation. So we see lots of expressions of different emotions, but it's also very clear that this was quite a difficult decision for lots of people to make as well. In fact, many people didn't actually really want the referendum to take place in the first place. People were very unsure about who to vote for. They made their decisions late in the campaign itself, and people were particularly angry and disappointed with the kind of nature of the campaign. There are lots of accusations of misinformation, lots of distrust as well. And as such, I think whilst the EU referendum was sometimes framed as being this kind of choice between heads and hearts in media discourse, for people writing for Mass Observation, they kind of rarely kind of articulated this sort of distinction. Instead, many people who voted for both Leave and Remain were very keen to stress how they based their decision, their vote, on the basis of gut feeling.
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the most surprising things, that this sort of discourse around, heads and hearts was really kind of absent from the Mass Observation sources. We came across it a handful of times, if that. And I think that the other thing that kind of surprised all of us was how different our findings are from this idea that the rational choice was Remain, and that the kind of passionate choice was Leave. That doesn't seem to be the case at all. There's very little difference actually in the way that people on both sides of the debate kind of weighed their feelings against their sort of reason, although we do see an awful lot of evidence that people were aware of those narratives. So we get a lot of Remainers saying, well, I feel this way, but also I feel that, or I know that people on the opposing side are voting with their emotions. So a lot of judging of other people's emotions. So there's a lot of there's sort of anger towards the opposing group, and we do see a clear kind of division developing, particularly after the referendum itself. But what we don't see a lot of, and I think this is another place where it sort of challenges conventional wisdom, is we don't really see a strong sort of sense that people are attached to the side that they have chosen. So a lot of the kind of political science literature would suggest that we're seeing a lot of kind of what's called kind of in-group attachment, so kind of strong polarization based on a sense of positive identity with one side or the other. We're not seeing that really in our findings at all, but what we are seeing is anger at the out-group, so a sort of slight difference in the way that kind of manifests itself.
Yeah, and I think ultimately this is one of the main advantages of looking at qualitative evidence that we find in the Mass Observation Archive, and one of the key things that we can really learn from our study is that we find evidence of attitudes and values that often are obscured or perhaps simplified just with kind of looking at sort of responses to mass surveys and opinion polls. And I guess what we're saying is that some people's reluctance to vote in the first place, people's attempts to kind of get on with their lives in the aftermath of Brexit, raises questions about the extent to which Leave and Remain actually do represent these kind of fixed badges of identity, which they are sometimes taken to be. I think another interesting thing to think about as well is we see how people try to get on with their lives in the aftermath of Brexit, and this desire to avoid talking about Brexit and perhaps politics more generally as well, which is interesting in the sense that we might think about the beginning of the referendum campaign and how it was initially framed as the idea that this would start a national conversation, and we might think about whether that actually really played out in practice. Perhaps not.
Yeah, so that's the research that we've been doing, and we are hoping to finish in the next few months and to share it a bit more widely after that. Thank you very much.
Cheers.